All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Believe in Bills, presented by FanDuel. I am Adam Benigni of WGRZ TV and Sports Talk Live Buffalo. With us today, Jay Skurski on the Bills beat for the Buffalo News, former Sports Talk Live team member as well.
Yeah.
And Jay, good to see you, man.
Good to see you too, Adam. Thanks for having me.
All right, Berea, Cleveland Browns headquarters, joint practice now officially in the books. And we should say congratulations going out to our good friend Sal Maiorana, who is now a grandfather.
Grandpa Sal. That's what we're going to start calling him in the press box. I'm sure he's going to love that. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
Right. He probably earned that title for different reasons prior to the arrival of his first grandchild.
So what do you think? Is this going to soften him up here a little bit, Adam, or what?
I hope so.
Yeah,
I would hope so.
That's the big question. He's going to be a big. I always think he's a big teddy bear anyway, but this might actually, that cold heart might just warm up just a little bit.
Those of us who know Sal and have worked around him for a long time know the real Sal. Like a lot of those guys, he is a teddy bear.
Yes,
but that gruff exterior, maybe it softens some of those edges just a little bit.
He's the most friendly curmudgeon I know, I guess is the best way to put it. Yeah.
Right. He's the guy that, you can, if you're a fan, you can despise what he has to say, the negativity and all of that, but you've got to tune in or, read his article to find out what he has to say. He's one of those guys. He's an institution.
Yeah, so, I mean, listen, if there's a historian of the Buffalo Bills, it's Sal, all right? And so on a serious note, we poke fun. He's my seatmate. I sit next to him at pretty much every game, so I'm allowed to pick on him just a little bit. And he's a Yankees fan, which I can pick on too, so exactly. as a Red Sox fan. But no, in all seriousness, there isn't probably another, my former colleague Mark Gaughan and Sal I would put up there as knowing the most about the franchise and the history of the Buffalo Bills is probably any two people that do what we do. And I'm thrilled for him, elated for him and his family that he's getting a chance now to be a grandfather and spending some time with some family.
Likewise here, and for all of us that believe. And Jay, we appreciate your time. I know you just filed your story down there and you're on deadline. You're going to be coming back and then back down to the preseason game. So we want to get to this, let you hit the road as quickly as possible, back up Route 90. All right, so joint practice. And we know that teams a lot of times prefer these to preseason games. Most coaches you talk to will tell you they get more out of this in terms of evaluation. It's controlled, so it limits exposure for like Josh Allen to hits and all of that. What were some of your takeaways from today's workout down there?
Yeah, so I focused mostly on the Bills offense. I was going to kind of see what Josh Allen did, what kind of day they had. We have the luxury of having multiple people down here, so Catherine Fitzgerald and Lance Lysowski, my colleagues, Lance was able to focus mostly on the Bills defense, whereas I looked at the offense. And I thought it was a good day for Allen. Unofficially, I had him at 17 of 22, didn't throw any interceptions, had one pass knocked down at the line of scrimmage. They're dealing with a lot of injuries right now at wide receiver. The severity of which, we'll see. I think, had this been a regular season game, some of those guys might be out there. But when you take Khalil Shakir out of the lineup, you take Keon Coleman out of the lineup, that's going to create opportunities for other players. We saw Steven Gosnell have an opportunity to work with the starters, catch a couple of passes from Allen. That's a big opportunity for a guy like that, right? But, to me, Adam, the guys that stood out were the tight ends collectively. I thought it was a really good day for Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid, and Jackson Haw as well, but really Kincaid individually. Couple of touchdown catches, 4 catches on the day. He looked like the mismatch that the Bills thought they were getting when they drafted him back in the first round a few years ago, and he's been a guy that has dealt with injuries, let's face it, and I think largely because of those, maybe hasn't always lived up to, what the Bills hoped they would be getting when they traded up in the first round even to get him. But he was probably the best player offensively on the field outside of Josh Allen today for the Bills. And it's been the continuation of, I think, a really strong summer for him. He's stayed healthy, number one. And, he has produced at a level that makes you encouraged when you think of adding DJ Moore to this offense and Khalil Shakir, what he can be. Dalton Kincaid, if he can be that second or third option for this passing game, I think can be a really strong development in his career, and then what that could mean for this offense.
Oh, there's no question about it. Sal and I have talked about that. If Kincaid can stay healthy and be consistent, I mean, we've seen, I know Brandon Bean has had the numbers, when
Yeah,
Sal talks
yeah.
about, I'm sure you've had the same off the or private meetings with him in his office. He's got the numbers where when Kincaid's healthy and in the game, look at the production versus when he's not, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could talk about the deal for DJ Moore and the addition and bringing him in, and that's no question that's an upgrade, right? That's been obvious through the course of the offseason and certainly into the preseason so far. But a healthy Kincaid in terms of that dimension, what he can add, and then what that does for everybody else. In a lot of ways, Kincaid might be the missing piece or might have been the missing piece.
Well, and I mean, that was the idea, right? When you draft a guy like that, when you, as I said, go up and trade for a guy like that to get into position, you don't want to miss out on having the opportunity to pick him. So you move up in the class. And it's because, we've seen tight ends around the league that can, obviously the gold standard is Travis Kelce, right? And what he means for Patrick Mahomes there in Kansas City. And I'm not comparing Dalton Kincaid to Travis Kelce. He's got a long way to go in his career before you would make that comparison. But that's the idea, is that an athletic pass-catching tight end can be really problematic for defenses. And Josh Allen said himself today after practice that he feels like he and Kincaid are really on the same page, that their chemistry is really strong right now. And I think that, that's showing itself on the field. As I mentioned, listen, it's joint practice, right? You're not going to get wowed by, the number of catches or anything like that, but it's more what, a sign of things possibly to come. And, Jackson Haw today talked about what a complete player Kincaid is becoming, right? In terms of how he's becoming a better blocker too. And then you get into, okay, what other possibilities does that open for the offense, right? If you can go two tight ends with Knox or with Hawes and Kincaid on the field, and then you've got James Cook, right? And if those guys are capable blockers, that really would seem to open up a world of possibilities for Joe Brady in this offense.
No question about it. Sticking with Kincaid for a second before we get to other aspects of the offense and of the team. How confident are you that, because they've talked about durability has been an issue with him. The Bills have addressed it. Sean McDermott addressed it with him during his time there. How confident are you that whatever he did during the course of this offseason, that his fitness or his durability, whatever it is, his strength, they've wanted him to get more rugged, more durable, that it's reached a level where he can maintain that during the course of a long regular season?
I mean, that's the $1 million question. Getting stronger, right? Being able to maybe play through some of those injuries, that kind of thing. That is a big question. He opted not to have surgery, which everybody probably knows. He was dealing with a PCL injury in his knee. Listen, I'm not going to second guess that. I am not a doctor. I know that, these guys see some of the best medical professionals in the world. And if they determine that was the right course of action, then okay, let's see it. At this point, though, coming off two seasons in a row with some pretty significant lost time because of those injuries, I think the only way that Dalton Kincaid is going to change people's mind in terms of being an injury-plagued player is he's going to be out there week in, week out, and that snap count is going to increase because, as you said, Adam, Brandon Bean has talked about the numbers with versus without him on the field are pretty jarring. He is a big part of this offense. The only thing that's really held him back, and then in turn, how does it hold the offense in general back, is the availability.
Let's widen out a little bit to the tight end room in general, regarded by a lot of people as among the best, if not the best, in the National Football League when you look at the group of them. I mean, we know what Dawson Knox is. And I was listening to Josh Allen a little bit in his press conference at the end of practice today. And in terms of like Hawes, what he brings to the table, everyone thinks in terms of him as a blocker, and that's the reason they acquired him, right? There's no question. But, I mean, I said this to Sal last year. There's nuance in his passing game. I think this kid brings a lot to the table.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Kincaid mentioned that today, too, that his route running, Jackson Haw's route running, has gotten a lot better. I was talking with one of my colleagues today on the sideline. Hawes gave a pretty good shove to one of the Browns cornerbacks after a play. So he plays with an edge, too, right, which you would expect for a blocker. I'll answer your question in a second. I'll point out that, these joint practices have sort of become known across the league as being kind of a fight club, right, for teams. But there really wasn't much of that today. I think that both sides kind of kept their cool and kept their composure pretty well. So I bet both coaching staffs are pretty happy with the amount of, the work that they got in. there was certainly competitiveness. There was jawing back and forth, but we did not see any of these brawls that you've kind of seen between teams. Getting back to Hawes, though, I do think that he's a little bit underrated in terms of what he can be as a pass catcher for this offense. I think back to early last season. I think it might have even been week 1 against Baltimore. He had one of the bigger catches in that game, and you're looking at it's at the point where you got to look at the roster and go, what number is that again? Making that play,
Yeah,
right? Because you're sort of unfamiliar with him. But I will tell you this, Adam, the Bills believe that he is the best blocking tight end in the NFL. They believed he was that as a rookie. And, that alone makes him, a worthwhile 5th-round draft pick, which is where they got him. If he can develop that, that next part of his game where he can be out on the field and you don't automatically know it's a running play, right? Because he's in there to block. That is, I talked, about Kincaid and the element of kind of unpredictability that he can bring to the offense. Well, you can almost multiply that by 2 if Jackson Haw can be a willing and capable receiver for this team.
All right, couple of additional points before we let you go. Any update on injuries, just in the big picture? McGovern is the one that stands out the most, right? Is he the biggest question mark still at this point in terms of the Texans in week 1?
Yeah, I would say so. I did not see Ed Oliver today. Of all the Bills injured players, and I don't have the full list in front of me, but the names. There's, Shakir, Coleman, McGovern, those guys. Oliver did not practice, and I did not see him on the field. I think it's a good sign when the guys are around, right? We saw Skylar Bell out there today doing some work off to the side with trainers, which I think is a very positive sign. I would expect, as I mentioned at the beginning, now there's some nuance here, right? Joe Brady has been, I would say, less than forthcoming with injury updates. We're getting the lower body hockey term. He's been pretty, slow to talk about any kind of real details with these injuries, which is fine. It's not required until the regular season starts, but once we get there, then we'll get the full injury report. I would say at this point, I would be cautiously optimistic that anybody that hasn't practiced is probably going to be good to go for week 1, though. And then that includes Conor McGovern, who I saw today taken in practice, didn't really have anything. It's a lower body injury that he's dealing with. There was no brace. There was nothing like that. So I think that would all be a good sign for his potential availability for week 1.
All right, couple of kind of wide angle questions for you because we haven't had a chance to talk to you specifically here on this show. Just the transition to Joe Brady as head coach, obviously through the course of the offseason and to now. I'm not one to read, as you know, too much into preseason games. That one this past weekend went about as well as you could expect. And I think if it says anything, that whatever transition plan he's had in place, we saw that translate to the field in a positive way. There's a different vibe with him at the helm. I'm just interested in your take, being around the team as much as you are, the differences you've seen and how well that Brady's adapted and the team has adapted to him.
Yeah, I think back to a moment at training camp. You probably saw this, Adam, maybe the pictures or the video, but, Khalil Shakir is doing a news conference, and he's got his really brand new daughter, beautiful little girl, sitting there right in front of him on the table. And he just looks so relaxed, so kind of happy. And that isn't to say at all that, that wouldn't have happened under Sean McDermott. But I feel like the word that kept coming to mind as I was around the team at St. John Fisher was relaxed. They seem to be really comfortable. And I don't know that we would always use the word relaxed for a Sean McDermott coach team, right? I think at times maybe they weren't as relaxed. And I think relaxed can be painted a couple of different ways. You could look at that as saying, oh, well, he's running a loose ship and that's not a good thing. But I'm not approaching it that way. I'm approaching it as a team that is, really, they're still getting the work in, and Joe Brady has expectations for this team, but they're doing it in a way that, they're able to build, chemistry with one another and chemistry with their head coach. Because yes, while Joe Brady, knows the offensive players for this team, a lot of them, and knows the defensive players, he doesn't know them at a level that he did previously, right? He doesn't know Terrell Bernard and Greg Rousseau and Ed Oliver the way that he probably does now as the head coach, right? And so I think Brady is a guy that I've seen him kind of grow into the role. And, I go back to just how I would say nervous he appeared at his introductory news conference, right? And that's understandable, right? This is one of the biggest moments in his life. But, that to me felt like a guy like, oh boy, I'm really taking on a new role here, a big role. And I think slowly, whether it be at the combine or then the first day of OTAs, the first day of mandatory minicamp, the first day of training camp, each step along the way, Brady has seemed to just kind of become a little bit more comfortable in his own skin with who he is and, sort of what he expects from this team. And again, listen, like so many other topics with this team, you talked about Kincaid or you talk about Jim Leonard and the new defense. What is that going to be? All of these questions we aren't really going to get an answer to until adversity hits. What happens if they go on a 2 or even a 3-game losing streak? How does Joe Brady react then? How does he get, the train back on the tracks, so to speak? So I think there's still a lot of unknown with Joe Brady, but in terms of, initial impressions, how he ran camp, I think everything has been, okay right now. And, I think he's eased off on guys at times where, you look at the sheer number of injuries they had last year in the preseason. And I know it sounds like a big number right now, but I feel like it might be kind of a calculated approach on Brady's part to, hey, let's be safe with these guys. Let's not force them back into the lineup, that kind of thing.
Yeah, Sal Maiorana quoted a team source on that, where you may have seen this.
Yeah.
There was some disagreement between Sean McDermott and the sports science staff as to the approach they should take, and McDermott wanted to go kind of not full throttle, but as close to full throttle as he possibly could, and they have paid a price with as you alluded to, with the injuries last year. So that's an interesting difference to kind of keep track of as they move forward here. You did bring up my next question. I know you're focused on the offensive side, but overall, the transition on the defensive side, I mean, how well they're able to do that and how soon they're able to execute that scheme at an elite level is going to dictate an awful lot in terms of how far this team goes. And I know Jim Leonard, you can't do it in one off-season cycle with a change at coordinator. It takes time to get all the personnel that you want in the right place. But how well do you see that adaptation going to this point based on the players they've acquired and the current players like a Greg Rousseau, for example, who have to transition into new roles in this scheme?
Yeah, the phrase that I've used, or the terminology I've used, is that this defense is going to deserve a little bit of a grace period at the first, say 6 weeks of the season. It's a new scheme, right? And players are being asked to do new things. And so I look at the team's bye as being in week 7 this year. Those first 6 games are going to be a challenge for this defense at times. I think that's reality. And I think that if we expect them to come out there and hold teams to 14 or 17 points a game and force multiple turnovers, that might be asking too much, quite frankly, of a defense and of players who are going to be asked to do new things. Now, to a man, the defenders on this team, and I'm thinking of the guys who have been here. So that's Rousseau, that's Terrell Bernard, that's Christian Benford and Cole Bishop, have all raved about the possibilities in this defense and about how versatile it's going to be. If there was a key word for the defense, it's versatility, right? And you don't want to know where Greg Rousseau and Ed Oliver and Bradley Chubb are going to line up on every single play. You don't want to know how a guy like Deion Walker, who everybody is so excited about, the potential that he brings to that defensive line and how he's going to be used. Listen, I know it's 1+ quarters of one preseason game, but you have to like what you saw against the Panthers from the defense. And so,
Sure.
Yeah, I think if you are going into into the 2026 season saying, what am I most excited to learn about this team? Well, if it's not Joe Brady, right, the head coach, as opposed to Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator, for me, it's, what do these defensive changes look like? Is Jim Leonard the right guy? Now, truly, we're not going to be able to answer that question until January, right? Because we've seen Sean McDermott's defenses at times dominate opponents in the regular season, right? But it hasn't translated to January and when it matters most, and that's the postseason. So it's going to be a while before we get those answers to this defense. But I would say that there is an optimism. There is a sort of breath of fresh air for the guys who were here, that they're being asked to do something different. I think that the defensive players on this team felt the frustration the same way that fans feel the frustration, or the media covering it felt the frustration of saying, hey, what they're trying to do here defensively just isn't working in the biggest moments. The players know that. And so, doing something new, doing something fresh, how does that look? Again, we'll start to learn that in September and October when the games start to count, but there's reason to be optimistic about it at this point.
All right, Jay, you've outlined a lot of the questions surrounding this team. FanDuel, presenting sponsor for this show and others on the Believe Network of podcasts. For what it's worth, Jay, at this point, Los Angeles Rams, your Super Bowl favorite at plus 500. Buffalo Bills, a lot of confidence out there that they can solve a lot of these issues. Plus 1,000. Second, Seattle Seahawks at plus 1,200, along with the Baltimore Ravens. Speaks to the expectations surrounding this team. Yeah, again, Vegas is what Vegas is. What's your take on the outside, the national view of the Buffalo Bills? Are they as much of a contender as those numbers would suggest, given the transition to a new head coach and some of what they're going through, particularly on the defensive side?
I think anytime you have Josh Allen, arguably the best football player on the planet, you're always going to be up there, right? In terms of, preseason favorites. I think if you were sitting in New England or in Denver right now, or, in Kansas City for that matter, you might be looking at that saying, boy, that's kind of a slap in the face to us, right? There's some motivation for Sean Payton and for Mike Vrabel and for Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. That said, though, I don't think it's completely unreasonable to have the Bills on the short list of AFC contenders. They have proven 6 years running here to reach the divisional round, the only team that can say that in the league, that they are a Super Bowl contender year in and year out. It gets back to what we've talked about, Adam. We gotta hit fast forward here to January and say, can this new coaching staff, can this new defense be the difference maker for this team that it has lacked under the Sean McDermott era, an era that is defined by a fabulous amount of regular season success, an ending of the postseason drought, a year in and year out contender who just for whatever reason was sort of missing that last step and that last piece of the puzzle. Can Joe Brady, can Jim Leonard, can this new defense be that missing piece of the puzzle? We'll start to get those answers as the season goes on.
All right, that is the ultimate question. Jay, we appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Yeah, always happy to be with you, Adam. I appreciate you having me.
All right, Jay Skurski of the Buffalo News leads the coverage for the Buffalo News, buffalonews.com. I am Adam Benigni of WGRZ-TV, Sports Talk Live Buffalo. Thanks for being with us here on Believe in Bills, and congratulations once again to Sal Maiorana of the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle, my usual partner here on the show. Sal and his family celebrating the birth of a grandchild. So thanks again for being with us here and Believe in Bills, presented by FanDuel.